Welcome to the Bladtcast. As always, I am Christian Blatt, and for our audio audience, in a little bit, you're going to hear a conversation I had with the great Mark Farner, who people know from Grand Funk Railroad and what he's up to these days. But for right now, tis the season, as they say. And I am looking forward to having a very festive conversation with Peter Orullian from Symphony North. Peter, I got your name right before we started talking, and then I tripped over it. I got really cocky about it. I'm like,
Yeah.
Orullian. Peter Orullian from Symphony North. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, I'm really grateful to have the opportunity to talk to you.
So in reading through the notes about you that are featured on the website, which people can just go to symphonynorth.com, and it's always great when a band has just the name. It's not, Symphony North Band or Symphony North Band Official, and, just being able to type in Symphony North and it comes up. But you know what? Everybody probably just Googles these days. Anyway, in reading about you, I was seeing that the idea of having, a Christmas time, holiday rock and theater experience is something that occurs to you back when you're in high school. And in reading on about that, it seems like this time of year in particular, Christmas time, was always important to you. And just sort of bring us up to that point where you're in high school and you start to begin the seeds for this performance, this kind of rock experience, and just some of those things every year that would be important to you, and sort of building that love for the season.
Yeah. Well, I had gotten much more serious about storytelling and music in high school. I started using discretionary time to, pursue those interests, attending conferences on fiction, and later beginning to teach fiction at conferences and seminars and some of the sort of fan conventions like Comic-Con and PAX West and some of those. And music, I began to write my own music. And, the third sort of leg of the stool is I'd always loved Christmas. And obviously as a kid, it was presents. But I sort of took note of this feeling that I think pervades at Christmas time. At least it's my experience, where people seem to be a little more patient with one another, a little gentler with one another, whether it's holding a door or letting someone in when you're merging on the freeway. I know those seems like trivialities, but for some reason, people of all walks seem to just have a sense of their humanity in a way that they don't the rest of the year. And it just got inside me. And so I love the tinsel, everything from the tinsel to the reverential. And I kind of, I live it. It's, for me, the decision to conflate those things into hopefully something I could do for a livelihood was just sort of natural and authentic from the very beginning. And as I was starting to get serious about those things, I thought, what would it look like if I could bring all of those loves together? And I had this notion of a sort of a rock theater experience. I hadn't written any music yet. But I thought, that could be something. And this goes, this is in the 80s, late 80s. Then, fast forward, I went to college, and I came out of college and I got into a relationship, and I moved to Seattle and started to work at Microsoft. And Microsoft can be a very harsh mistress. It's not an easy place for creatives anyway, and mortgages and all of those things. And so time just went, as it does for a lot of us. I was still writing, and I published some novels through Macmillan in New York, traditionally published books. And I was in some bands, and I was able to go to Europe and sing some big rock and metal festivals, but it wasn't ever like my vision. And then in I think it was 2015, I'll have to check the year, I was at a TSO concert in Seattle, and Paul O'Neill, who founded and composed all their music, he had some other writing partners here and there, but he really was the brain trust on that one.
Yeah, and just to sort of elaborate for our audience, TSO
Yeah,
is Trans-Siberian Orchestra, and it's such a massive entity that it sort of grew out of his previous band Savatage, and then it becomes Trans-Siberian Orchestra, which there are two versions of it touring around the country. So on any day, probably from the beginning of November until early January, there could be 4 Trans-Siberian Orchestra shows
that's right.
happening in the United States on one day. And so it's a tremendous production, and it's I would say that it's really the gold standard for sort of what we're talking about. Christmas time with like a rock presentation, and so you got to meet Paul O'Neill, who was the brains behind it.
Yeah,
And I know he passed away a few years ago.
he did in 2017.
Yeah.
So this was just, a year or two, I think, before that. And because I was working in sort of the entertainment and music at Microsoft, I was able to finagle some backstage passes. And for whatever reason, Paul was there that night. He never toured with them. He always was based in Florida, writing the music and conceiving the next thing. And they had Paul had finished all of his Christmas stuff. He'd sort of always intended to write sort of a trilogy of Christmas records, and he'd moved on to writing other, non-Christmas related stuff. So he was, writing and creating, but he was there that night for some reason. And so when I was backstage, meeting some of the members of the band who, many are friends, I saw Paul. And so I took the opportunity to tell him, how much his music meant to me, how much I respected him as an artist and creator. And I just, mentioned that I had this vision to do, a Christmas rock, big sort of story related thing. And so he pulled me back into his private green room and spent 45 minutes with me, wanting to know about me. And I kind of said, look, I don't know if I need to do this anymore. And he looked at me and said, Peter, I will be disappointed in you if you don't. We always need more Christmas music and more Christmas stories. So he was a big catalyst for me. And then it was the same year that Paul passed. I stepped away from Microsoft and started this Symphony North journey that I had for 25 years or whatever it was. And that's how, and the good thing is, during the interim, I had published books. So I had studied the art and craft of narrative design and fiction for a long time, and I'd had success publishing. I'd performed and I'd written music. So I kind of had developed the skills finally to bring those things together. And that's how Symphony North was born.
Right. And in your notes, it mentions that there was a science fiction series called Vault of Heaven, that something that you wrote. And so over how much time did you spend on that, and how many books were there in that series?
So there's 2 that have been released. There's a third one that's in the writing. That's an epic fantasy. Lord of the Rings is sort of the gold standard there.
Sure. Yeah.
So it's very much in that tradition. I am currently collaborating with a writer by the name of Brandon Sanderson, who at this moment in time is probably the biggest name in fantasy fiction. And we're writing a sort of contemporary fantasy that is where music is central to the character and to the narrative. In fact, most of my fiction, as it happens, does. Usually if it's fantasy, I've got some sort of music magic system. I have now twice collaborated with Dream Theater, who's a big progressive metal band. They've written a couple of concept albums. And so I partnered with the band and with John Petrucci, their sort of founder and guitar player and central songwriter.
Yeah, and you wrote a novel that tied into one of their recent albums, right? Because you wrote 2 of them. Okay, yeah. So I know that a lot of times that band will do sort of a lot of like multi platform sort of ways of storytelling. And one of the best things about Dream Theater is that I remember they released a collection at one point, which was called Greatest Hit and some other songs you might know, or something like that. Because they have the one song that's technically like a radio hit, at least it was in
Yeah.
the early '90s. But again, this huge band with a tremendous following, and people know the participants in that. I wanted to sort of talk a little bit about this idea of Christmas and how it can be expressed with varying degrees of different styles of music. So obviously, Christmas time, we'll hear a lot of the same standards and some of the familiar versions. I always appreciate a little bit of a more modern take on a song. I love Chuck Berry's Run Run Rudolph. There's those Beach Boys songs. And just a couple that really stand out for me were always the Kinks' Father Christmas, which again, I guess is about beating up Santa Claus. So it's not, it's not festive in the same way, but I do love the idea of, and I like, obviously the Kinks are great. And not as well known here as it is in the UK, but Slade has that song. Here it is, Merry Christmas. So there is sort of like you have to look for him sometimes, but there is fairly well represented, different genres of rock, and someone who listens to Christmas music as soon as the local station switches over. My kids all know that they hear it, and actually, my friend that I started this podcast with, and he's still with me sometimes when his schedule allows for it, my friend Will Sterling, he has this belief that November 1st every year should be called Joy to the World Day. That is the first day where if you want to listen to Christmas music, go right ahead. You don't have to. But, Halloween's over. And, that can be a fun way to celebrate. Now, there are people who feel like, okay, that, Christmas music goes on a long time. But I enjoy it, and it tends to, in general, put people in a good mood. You could talk about the songs that maybe people have had enough of, but,
Sure.
I believe that I heard just the other day that annually Mariah Carey makes $2.5 million just on the royalties
I don't doubt it.
from just this time of year. Yeah.
Yeah.
And not to mention all the other hits she has. But so,
Of course. Yeah.
we all hear these songs. What were some that maybe as a kid, before you even start thinking like, oh yeah, I want to try and do this kind of storytelling, were there some that stood out for you? It doesn't have to be any of the ones that I mentioned, but
Yeah.
was it like, oh, it's really cool to hear, a rock version of this song or an original song?
Yeah. In my mind, every year there's a rash of artists who release a Christmas album, and I love it all, but I would say that oftentimes it's very subtle and slight, variations on the standards. So it's more about, if you love Neil Diamond or you love Rob Halford and they do a Christmas record, you love just to hear them sing the songs you love.
Sure.
It's rarer to find artists who like really reinvent with different instrumentation or write original Christmas music. And the band that, I grew up listening to the Lennon Sisters and Nat King Cole and, Bing Crosby. They were what was on the turntable in my home. And I loved it. But when the spark of like modern sort of reinvention of Christmas for me was Mannheim Steamroller.
Sure.
And Chip Davis, who I think is a national U.S. treasure as a composer, I had followed him in his Fresh Air series. He sort of invented new age music. He was the first guy to really put that on the map. And he did a Christmas album. I think it was in the mid 80s. And, some standards, but like really reinvented, not just like a subtle twist, but really reinvented. And he did, the unthinkable in some ways. He added drums because he's a drummer. By the way, trivia for you, he wrote C.W. McCall's Convoy. Remember that old tune?
Sure. Yeah.
That was his first big radio hit.
Tie-in for a movie, Convoy. Yeah, about truck.
Yeah.
And Mannheim Steamroller is one of those that there's a good chance that people watching or listening to us right now hear that song every year. Specifically, I think it was their Deck the Halls was
That's
the
right.
one that I heard the most. And
That's right.
I didn't know what it was for years. The timeline you're talking about definitely matches up. I remember hearing it in the late 80s and I'm like, oh, this is really cool. But you had no way to find out what that was unless you wanted to call a radio station and be like, what was that
Yeah.
song you just played?
It
You
was,
know?
you're exactly right. You're exactly right. That song still, it's like Mariah Carey. You can't go anywhere at Christmas and someplace
Yeah.
you're not going to hear it in a mall or, a drive through. Um, so, but they began to tour pretty successfully on the strength of that record because it was so well received, where they didn't really tour that like that with their Fresh Air series. And then, of course, recognizing the success of it, Chip began to write more. And they wrote, I think, 3 or 4 that were unique. And then there's a lot of repackaging of those songs in different, live versions and stuff throughout the years. But that was when I remember being at that first tour. There was something they finished with their Still in Nocta, which is Silent Night, their version of that, which for me is still maybe my most favorite version of that song ever. And I just remember it just striking right through my heart. I mean, I know it sounds sappy, but I walked away from there just on cloud nine. And then it was, I don't know, 10 years later or something that TSO took the next step and gave, modern Christmas music a little bit more reinvention with a little heavier sound and a little bit of a narrative dusting, kind of vignettes, but not really a narrative through line, and not a character that goes through change and catharsis. So my idea is that from curtain to curtain, when we do a show or in our records, it's the songs, I think they can stand alone, but if you take them linearly through the story, they have hopefully an aggregate impact. And that's how I'm trying to sort of evolve Christmas music.
Yeah, and I think that obviously you're referencing sort of Mannheim Steamroller, Trans-Siberian Orchestra. Those are sort of the foundation for anybody who's even thinking of what you're talking about.
Yeah.
It's like they did it. It's almost like they built the car that somebody might try and drive if they want to
Yeah,
tell
those are
these
the
stories. Yeah.
shoulders of giants that you get to stand on.
Yeah, and the thing that I like about Christmas music is, yes, every year there is a new album, and sometimes you can smell the cash grab of somebody who's like, man, they just put out a Christmas album just because they want a little bit of that Mariah Carey money. I get it, but the impressive thing, and it's been a very long time. I can't actually think of one off the top of my head. When you hear what is definitely an original song, and it doesn't matter the genre of music, you're like, this one's really good and it's new. I think about half the time that I think that, I look and I'm like, oh no, this is a re-record of somebody else's,
Yeah.
and so it can be tough. But when you do hear it, it is impressive, and obviously you referenced some of the basically the Mount Rushmore of Christmas voices, Bing Crosby and some of those. We hear a lot of Gene Autry. Maybe it's because we live in Southern California. I'm not sure, but so it is great when people kind of get to experience this. And as a kid growing up, the songs were very important because we would hear them a lot. And I enjoyed a lot of Christmas specials, the big ones that people know. For our visual audience, it's kind of a callback to a recent episode we just did where we talked about Emmett Otter's Jug Band Christmas, and that's from the Jim Henson Company, for people who don't know. And the songs in that are written by Paul Williams, who's a tremendous songwriter. And it's amazing, the music that is from this Christmas special that honestly probably a lot of people still don't know. And just as a kid, we were lucky enough to have HBO. And in the month of December, that special was literally on every single day, Peter, literally every day. So it was like I would watch it and I loved it, but it was also like, oh yeah, it must be time for Emmett Otter to be on. And those songs, you get older and you start to have stronger emotions about family and dealing with things at Christmas time. So for me, things like that always overpower. And getting to tell stories like Symphony North is looking to do, I think it's great. Yeah, look, it's great when anybody takes a swing, but I appreciate it. Now, I've only heard a few songs. I know that the publicist that set this up, my friend Jody, she sent me a few songs, and the one that our audio audience will hear after our conversation is the Bell Ringer. Talk a little bit about uh, that song, which it's got a couple of different sections, and I think what you hope somebody who hears that for the first time, what they might think and be motivated to hear more Symphony North after that.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I did when I wrote the record is I knew I wanted to use some of the canon, Christmas canon, but I also recognized that sometimes the lyrics are not going to help you advance the story. So when I charted out the album, I was very thoughtful about laying the foundation of the story, and then identifying places where the music of the standards, like you know, like in that first one, I think Jingle Bells and Silver Bells is referenced thematically as motifs in the Bell Ringer song. Those lyrics are not going to help advance my story, but the music was consonant with part of the storytelling. So I did this whole sort of architecture for the narrative design where I picked songs from the Christmas canon that made sense thematically or tonally, and then where there was other parts of the story, I had to write original music. And so as you listen to that first one, it's really the framing of the story. It's about the bell ringer who he's a veteran who's been drifting for 30 years because he's had a very tough life. He was he lost his parents as a child. He was so he's orphaned. He lived in a boys' home. He wound up on the streets. He wound up going to war. When he came home, he did find love, but his wife contracted cancer, and passed. So the point being this, he's had a very sort of tortured life, and he got on a bus, left. The story is set in the Bronx, and he's been drifting for 30 years, kind of trying to get away from the memories of his tragic past. And so the story opens as he's trying to come home, and but the memories are kind of following him, and he takes the only job he can get as a guy who's got not a penny to his name, ringing a bell over a charity pot. And a quick aside there, I know that Salvation Army is noted most for using that sort of charity mechanic, but it predates them. It goes back to Liverpool, and there's a great history behind the use of pots and bowls to collect change from travelers for the poor. And so the in the story, it's just a charitable organization. This guy gives Jack, that's the name of the character, a job. And so throughout his the record, he encounters a lot of different people who have different needs, whether they're poor and down on their luck, or they're homeless, or they're one is a firefighter who had lost his legs in the line of duty. So he meets these various people, and while he's trying to come home, and for him, home means reconciling with the memory of his lost wife and his son, while he's doing those things, he's constantly pulled away from that by the needs of these people that he meets in the streets. And so a lot of the songs tell the stories of those encounters. And then there's this progression of him sort of learning that home is not what he thought it was. And he's found home by being in service of these people who need his help. And so the climax of the record is a song called Gift of Self. And that's the epiphany he has, is that the best gift you give is the gift of yourself. I know, again, when you say it out loud, it sounds a bit maudlin, but I do believe that. I think your time and your willingness to help is more important than a material gift. And so the bell ringer, that song frames the story. And then going on from there, you start to go with the bell ringer as he encounters these people, and he has these moments in time where he grows in his understanding of what Christmas is, and thereby learns that he really can come home again. And that's kind of the tagline is, there's that old saying, you can't go home again. My conceit with this is you can.
Yeah, no, and sometimes even when you can't, there's sort of that idea that even if you can't right now, you do hope to be able to. I mean, obviously, I'll be home for Christmas. If you boil down the lyrics and you take the moment to look at the history of it, it comes out during World War II. It is from the point of view of a soldier who will definitely not be home for Christmas. That's why at the end he says, "Only in my dreams." And
By the way, I love that you know that. A lot of
oh
people
yeah,
don't know the origins of that song.
yeah, there's a different
What it means.
verse that we don't hear on modern versions that was a little bit more contemporary. What I learned recently was that the BBC banned the song because they thought it was too depressing, and they didn't want it to lower morale. And I was like, okay, look, I get it. It's not a happy song. It's not up on the rooftop, but at the same time, it's beautiful in the storytelling of that idea. And I think that the listener can be like, oh, wow, I really am lucky that I am home for Christmas. And so I feel like, the story, as you're telling your story, it just makes me think of, it's certainly not the same story, but it's the same emotions that you can instill in people
Right.
and, tell a similar story. So the album follows Jack. It's his story. Is that
It's
correct?
his story. Yeah. There are some of the songs that are sort of rendered from the point of view of the people that he meets. Um, there's he meets a very poor woman. He can tell because the hem of her dress is sort of tattered and worn. And he has this beautiful moment where he knows what it's like to be down, and so he kind of tries to shake his head and say, "Don't give, right? Don't put your money in the pot." And she recognizes that Jack needs to see her willingness to sacrifice. He needs to see that. So she chooses to do it and thereby teaches him something, right? And so Jack is learning from these people even as he's trying to help them. There's a pair of songs about street kid, and how he meets this street kid who's homeless, like the way Jack was when he was young. The street kid uses Jack's own words, that some of the things that he learned on the streets, to help him stand back up when life just got too much. And there's another set of songs I love a lot called "No Fairy Tales" and "Yes Fairy Tales," and it's one of the songs that's kind of a send up of Christmas. It's like the person talking about the irrationality of it and how we need to be grounded in the world, and right on its heels, there's a song that says "Yes Fairy Tales," which is a lot of our fans' favorite song, which really talks about all of these things that we see at Christmas, like the little drummer boy and Frosty the Snowman, all these sort of trappings of innocent belief. There's an importance inside that idea, and the bell ringer. It's almost a fight song as it concludes, because he's saying, I'm going to stand here with my conviction that those ideas are important. I'm going to stand in the cold, so that you can see me do it. That pairing, I do a bunch of this in the album where I have a pairing of songs that sort of go together. There's one pairing of songs about a mother who can't afford to give her daughter who has cancer anything for Christmas. All she can do is come ask Jack to kind of play Santa, come to her house because her kid can't get out, and just be there to try and cheer her up. And then the other side of it is from the daughter's point of view, and she tries to get Jack to help her parents understand she doesn't need anything. She just needs them to try and be normal and just share their family love at Christmas time, since her time is short. And so there's these pairings where the story, I think, gets more poignant. And so there's not a lot of what I call meta Christmas songs where it's Christmas songs about Christmas. They're more story moments that I hope embody what Christmas is, versus like talking about Christmas, if that makes sense.
No, it absolutely does. And Yes, Fairy Tales is one of the songs that I was sent. And the fact that it is the MP3 I have has a 10 in front of it tells me that it's probably track 10 on the album. And
Yeah.
so it seems like it would come at a point. And you're sort of what you're talking about, sort of some of the trappings of Christmas time. It's very easy. Like, what kind of enjoyment of Christmas do you want to have? I have two small kids. They're 9 and 7 now. So it's a lot of the fun, bright, happy times. And, sometimes you're reminded of, as you're talking, I'm reminded of the stories like The Little Match Girl. And there are so many things about Christmas that, can be heartbreaking, but in the way, as we were saying about I'll Be Home for Christmas, there's sort of that realization of like, oh my God, that's not me. So, and look, even I was talking about Emma Daughter's Drug Band Christmas. I mean, it's essentially the gift of the Magi, or no, yeah. That's where it's like, oh, I sell my watch so I can buy a ribbon for her hair, but then she shaved her hair to buy me a chain for my watch. And it's like,
Yep.
so now, yeah, we both gave something up, and now we've both been given two useless gifts. But and
But
but there's
that
a sweetness.
sacrifice,
I was gonna say,
yeah,
there's the sweetness at the heart of that,
yeah,
and so much of the storytelling you get, it's I'm not gonna lie, there are definitely Christmases where I gotta lean into the happier stuff, but
oh, for sure. And I do
yeah.
both every, I every year I still watch the Rankin and Bass
Oh my gosh, of
motion
course, yeah.
animation. I love those. Santa Claus is Coming to Town with Mickey Rooney. I love all of that stuff. And every year I find new things in them, whether I'm researching some of the voice actors or whatever. But just last night I watched one I'd never seen before, which is rare, called Winter Thaw, and it's got
Oh, I've
John
never
Rhys
seen that.
Davies, who played Gimli in Lord of the Rings, and it's based on a Tolstoy story, and it's one of those it's a little bit more sort of heartfelt. So like I mean, I genuinely, like I said at the beginning, I love the tinsel, I love silly, I love all of that, but I also, obviously as an adult, appreciate some of this other kind of storytelling more than I did when I was a kid. And so if you come to a Symphony North show or you listen to the record, there's some just straight up cool sort of thrilling tunes. We have a song called Solfeggietto, which is CPE Bach's song, not the Bach, but his son. That's a ripping tune. I have some amazing musicians in the band. And then in the middle, there's a breakdown section that is Patapan, which is a lesser known Christmas carol. And that song's just thrilling. There's no lyrics. It's an instrumental. It's just a boom. It's a thrill ride. But then there's some of the sort of more poignant things. And so that was deliberate on my part. You learn as a storyteller, you need to have these emotional ebbs and flows. You can't like hit someone in the grief bone constantly. That,
Yeah.
those moments have to be counterbalanced with fun. And so, like I said, the No Fairy Tales, it's not a serious takedown of Christmas, but it's sort of thematically based on Deck the Halls. But it's a fun, sort of bright Christmas song. And so I tried very hard to have these sort of up and down moments, to take you on the journey of the bell ringer. And we have not hit like mass awareness yet, but for the fans that we have met, it's gratifying that they find that journey. They find these highs and lows inside it.
Yeah, that's interesting. I want to sort of pull on that thread in a moment, but it was interesting that you referenced that there was another Bach that I never realized. So the Bach you're referencing is basically like the Hank Williams the third. It's sort of like the next generation
Yeah.
going forward.
He,
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was going to say that song it's kind of my rendition of his most famous song. If you don't recognize the name, I guarantee you that you've heard Solfeggietto just like you've heard Deck the Halls from,
Right.
It's that type of song.
Well, obviously, when you're working on a Christmas project and you're trying to, as you're saying, increase awareness of it, it's a lot different than, oh yeah, we put a band together. And even if you're, say Dream Theater, where you're doing, concepts, or, even if somebody has written like a rock opera, it's great because you can tour on that. You can promote it 12 months out of the year. But when you're focused on Christmas projects, your window is fairly small, because I look, I'll occasionally have a day where I'll ask my Alexa to just play some Christmas music because it'll put me in a good mood. My kids used to do it in the summer because it would make them laugh. That it's like, oh my gosh, they're really playing it. But in general, people don't really want to hear about it really until it gets pretty close to what I referenced,
That's
Joy
right.
to the World Day. So what are you finding? Obviously, I think people can imagine what the obstacles would be, but what are you finding are some of the best ways to approach making sure people are aware of this in the time of year where they're like, okay, I'm interested in hearing more about this, or possibly going to one of the shows?
Well, we don't have massive budgets because we're effectively an independent artist right now. So we mostly do social, and most of our traction we've found on Facebook. Yeah, in general, I think that the style of music is not, it's not pop, it's not rap. So it's not the sort of main airwaves style music for, teenagers or high school kids. So the demographic, I guess I'm saying on Facebook, aligns best with us, just doing sort of grassroots. But you absolutely nailed it. The biggest challenge of doing what I'm trying to do is that it's only sort of salient for a lot of people for a narrow window in the year. Some people even resist Joy to the World Day. Like they don't want to do anything till
A,
Thanksgiving's over.
a lot of people do, actually. Yes.
And
Yeah, that's very true.
I always say to people who, do the bah humbug to Christmas music before, you know, November 27th or whatever it is. I says, yeah, why listen to all those songs about goodwill towards men and happiness? We don't need to do that.
Yeah, right.
And they're like,
Exactly.
okay, fair enough.
We only need peace on earth 1 month out of the year.
Yeah,
Peter.
don't
Come
put that
on,
in my face.
don't stretch it into October. That's crazy talk.
But and I don't expect this to be true of everybody, but probably one of the most gratifying things I hear from the people who find our music is that they spin it all year round. And so that's, obviously not all of our fans do that, but I hear that more often than I would have expected. So there's a nerve that we're hitting that, keeps us, I guess, resilient enough to keep, trying to push the music out. And that's why I started by saying how grateful I am to get to talk to you, because, we only do get to talk for these few weeks a year. And so whenever someone's willing to let me talk to them about Symphony North, I'm genuinely grateful.
Well, and I think we'd be doing a disservice to the project if we didn't give you time to talk about your collaborators on this. And Jody's nice enough to send me lots of materials on lots of bands that I talk to, and I always like to read through the other members. When I got to Symphony North, I had to keep scrolling because there's a lot of people involved in this project, aren't there?
Yeah. So we're fortunate. We have 4 former TSO Trans-Siberian Orchestra members who've contributed. They've all toured with us at one point or another. A couple of vocalists, Jody Ashworth and Michael Lanning and Tim Hockenberry. And then a former lead violinist, Valerie Vagoda. Val has also composed for Disney. Michael and Jody have both been on Broadway. Tim was an America's Got Talent semifinalist. So there's a lot of good sort of DNA there. I've got, people who've been in various touring, rock and metal touring groups for Nevermore. Man, that list is really long. And then I've got players. My new narrator is actually a voice actor who lives in London. He's done stage work in plays. He's been on television. So I've been very fortunate, and I think it's not just me. When I've approached folks about participating, I usually do a lot like we've done, and I talk about how I arrived at wanting to do this and why I do it and what the story's about. And so once they hear the music and they kind of hear the story, there's a genuine interest to want to be part of the project. And every time it comes around to wanting to put together a show or record new music, every person who's been involved is always raising their hand. So, I've got what do they call it? A embarrassment of riches in terms of talent associated with Symphony North.
Yeah, that's really what it looked like. So as we're talking, it's early December. The day that you and I are talking right now, it's 20 days from Christmas. What do you feel is worth people knowing in these next 3 weeks or so? Obviously, symphonynorth.com is where they can find out more and find out how to actually hear the music we're talking about. And YouTube is a very funny thing, Peter. I would love to play snippets of the songs, but even though they're your songs and you wrote them, I'll still get copyright notices if I play it. But the audio audience will get to hear some. And it's so easy now. If someone's watching this, All you got to do is open another window and type in Symphony North, spelled exactly the way you think it is. Symphony is a little bit of a tricky word, I'm not going to lie, but I bet if it'll autocomplete when you type it in.
Yeah.
So what does the rest of December look like for you in Symphony North?
Well, I'm actually in the throes of the new story and new album. So I'll finish the story architecture for the next album. I've actually started some of the composition. So even though I compose year round, there's a special extra fairy dust in composing Christmas music and writing Christmas stories during the month of December. So a lot of my time will be doing that. Um, doing like we're doing now, trying to talk about it with folks, sharing things online. One thing I would mention is if your listeners go to the YouTube channel, a couple of years ago during COVID, when we couldn't go out and play, we did like a lot of people did. Everybody videoed themselves at home playing the songs, and we created the full sort of experience of listening to the album, and we had the narration recorded too. So and the narration, like when we stage the show, we have a narrator come out between 90% of the songs to create that connective tissue of the story that the lyrics, can't sufficiently advance. So we put that together. And so you can literally sit down for 90, 100 minutes, whatever it is, and get the full story of the bell ringer with the music on YouTube. I think that's the only place we have it sort of available. So I would, if you really want to get deep into what you and I've talked about, that would probably be the best way. But on Symphony North, and by the way, the music's available on all the streaming places. So if you've got Spotify or Pandora, you can get the music's kind of free to stream and have. But on our website, of course, we have things you can buy if you're interested in supporting us. But honestly, really honestly, right now, I'm not pushing sales. For me, it's just wanting people to hear the music and the story. Because we have really, what's the term in marketing? Conversion rates. When people like get into the story and the music, we usually find that they stick around with us. And so I'm just anxious for people to hear it.
Yeah, no, and look, that was always the best thing, especially growing up, finding a new band who you didn't know about and finding out like, oh, they have 5 records that came out before this. And, now click of a button, you can listen to all of it. But I remember it's like, well, I'm going to have to save $15 for one CD, and then I have to pick which one I want. And, just the excitement of knowing it's out there. And yeah, look, I think that with the delivery systems you're talking about, the Spotify's, the Pandora's, all of that, the idea of getting it heard. I mean, I produce a podcast about heavy metal. It's called 100 Songs That Define Heavy Metal. And it's hosted by Brian Slagle, who founded Metal Blade Records. And when we put it together, obviously, he wants his time. His time has value. But the most important thing to him was, I just want people to hear it. He wanted to make a deal with a company who he felt would get it out there and people would hear it and respond to it. It's gotten tremendous feedback. And I guess I did turn this into promotion for that. But we've been doing it we've been doing it for a few weeks. And because of who he is, we've had on Kerry King from Slayer, and we've had Lizzie Borden talking about Alice Cooper. So, and I've never had to book any of the guests. It's all like, oh yeah, I just emailed, I emailed Frank Bell from Anthrax. He's going to be on, it's one of those. So
that's awesome.
Yeah. So it's tremendous to just get to talk to, some of these artists, the little bit that I get to talk to them when we're connecting the way you and I are right now. But the point in mentioning that show is the importance to Brian was, yeah, I just want people to hear it because yeah, you can sometimes sign a deal and like, oh my gosh, look at all the money they gave me. Yeah, but how many people listen to it? Not that many, So It's like, you can star in the greatest movie that's ever been made, but if 100 people saw it, it's like a tree that falls in the woods. So obviously, I think that getting the songs out there is the important thing, and making sure that people know that they can go to Symphony North. And I've enjoyed talking to you. I enjoyed the songs that I heard. I was very interested in what you said, that the YouTube channel has sort of a presentation of the whole thing, because I would be very interested in seeing how it all comes together. And that is the COVID times, there was a lot of bad stuff that people had to deal with. Obviously, some very tragic, sad stories, but music found a way to, there were a lot of bands that were like, yeah, I'm just going to sit in my living room. And, it was almost like coffee shop, open mics, like
Yeah.
message me on Facebook and, let me know what songs you want to hear. And it was great in that way.
Yeah.
So that's
That
great
was
to
a silver
hear.
lining.
Yeah, that's great to hear that that it's out there. And I assume they just go to YouTube, type in Symphony North,
Yeah,
symphonynorth.com.
that's the blessing of having other than symphony can be tricky, but a name that's kind of non-standard is if you type that in, it will immediately come up in your search.
Yeah. Look, if you can type in Mannheim Steamroller or Trans-Siberian Orchestra, Symphony North is actually really easy, Peter. It's not that hard
I agree
compared to
with
some
you.
of those
Yes,
things.
that's exactly
Well,
right.
I really appreciated getting to talk to you, and I look forward to sharing this with our audience and having them find your music. And I hope that we speak again, maybe somewhere in like 11 months or so, to talk about what's next for Symphony North in 2025.
I would love that. I mean, next year I'll probably be able to talk to you about the second record.
Yeah, no, that'll be fantastic. And as I mentioned, our audio audience will get to hear the bell ringer, and our YouTube audience will notice that this video is about to end. But there's plenty over there on the Symphony North YouTube channel that they can find. Thank you so much for your time, Peter. I really appreciate it.
You too. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.